So as a freelance or being self-employed is something that sounds incredibly glamorous, doesn't it? I mean, freelance, it rings of freedom, being able to do what you want, when you want, how you want, or self-employed. I mean, who here is going to argue that the best boss you could possibly have is yourself? Anyone? No. Well, it might sound like you've escaped the tyranny of horrible bosses, and it might sound like you found freedom, but the reality about freelance is that what it actually means is you can't take out a cell phone contract because no one trusts you to pay back your monthly payments because freelance is seasonal or the work is sporadic and you never know when you're going to next work. And sometimes what happens is you can't produce 6 months of statement showing that you've had consistent income. So it's not all that it seems to be upfront. And what's amazing, though, is I had the privilege of being in the film industry, and that adds a little bit of extra glamour to freelance. As being in the film industry, whenever I mention that, I see people's eyes light up as they expect stories of me meeting famous people and going to exotic places. But what actually happens when you're in the film industry is you make lots of coffee, you carry heavy gear, and your tax is incredibly complicated. It's freelance at its best. But I have to be honest, it wasn't all that bad. I did get to meet some famous people, and I've got some cool stories for you. There was William H. Macy and Meg Ryan. You might not know them because their career was ending when my career was starting about a decade ago. And then I worked on the iconic TV series 24. If you don't know what that is, it's probably because you're 24 and it was before your time. But basically, there was a actor called Kiefer Sutherland, and he was looking after and protecting America, and he would fight off terrorists. He was incredibly brave. He could endure much torture. But one day on set, I put some chalk down to mark where he's meant to stop, and he knelt down in it, and as he got up and he saw his pants were dirty, that broke him. And we saw another side of him. I also had the privilege of working with Daniel Craig. Yeah, Daniel Craig. It was amazing. He's really short, but he's an incredibly nice guy. And what would happen is we would be... what would happen is we would be standing on set, cameras about to roll, I'd be ready to mark the scene or the take, and he would be standing there ready to be famous, and everything in me would say, Iain, just play cool, just be cool. And I would go, so, Daniel Craig, how was your weekend? Or what are you up to tonight? And we would chat. I mean, that was a highlight of my life, standing next to Daniel Craig and being able to chat to the future James Bond. And being able to chat to the future James Bond. But what's incredible is, even though it was a highlight for my life, I think if you had to go to Daniel Craig and say, remember that moment that you got to chat to Iain Kruger, I think he'd say, Iain who? And then finally, a story from the film industry is I had the privilege of working on Avengers as my last movie. Top A-grade Hollywood movie, billion-dollar budget. If you don't know what it is, you're incredibly old or you haven't watched a movie for a decade. It could be both of those things. But it's just incredible. I mean, Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America, all together blowing up Joburg. It was just another highlight in my life. And I'm not sure which part of that was the highlight, all superheroes in one place or blowing up Joburg. You saw it coming. It really was. It's a tough call. And what's amazing is that my name's in the credits. It's really there. You have to wait 30 minutes. And then there's a point where the credits stop getting listed by name by line. You just get a paragraph, a block of names. And then after about 5 blocks of names, you get to essay crew. And then somewhere near the bottom of that block of names, you get A camera, and then 3 names. And you get B camera, and then 3 names. Then you get C camera, 2 names, and then there it is. In all the glory of Hollywood, Iain Kruger, C camera, second assistant. It's there. It's there. You have to watch the length of the movie after the movie to see it, but it's there. And I also got to do amazing things being freelance in the film industry. I got to fly over the Transkei in a helicopter. I got to travel through most of Africa. I got to go to incredible places like Bali. We gunfights and gunfire and blowing up stuff. We blew up so much stuff. I almost got hit by the bumper of a car that was blown up about 300 meters away from me, just being on set. So we did some really fun, exciting stuff on set. But if I'm honest, it really is hard work to be a freelancer. You see, when you're a freelancer, you're only as good as your last job, which what happens is you get enslaved to your client because word of mouth matters so much. You never know when your next day of work is going to come, but at the exact same time, I would find deep anxiety in me every time the phone rang because it could be a 5 a.m. call for me that next morning. And then on set, the hours were long. You were often in the elements, working hard and long hours. There were times when I would leave set, get home, and have 6 hours to shower, sleep, and get back to set. You see, waking and this would leave me often. I would wake up. I would wake up in the morning. I would be dazed and confused. I would be tired. My muscles would be sore and stiff. I wouldn't know who I was or where I was. And I would ask this question: why am I waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning to eat breakfast? Why? And then the deeper questions of where am I? Who am I? Would come. It's amazing how philosophical you can get at 3 a.m. in the morning after a hard day's work. But this really is the question I want to speak to us about tonight, is who are you and what defines you? Who are you and what defines you? And what's incredible is every career will try and be the answer to that question. It doesn't matter whether you're a doctor or a lawyer, a teacher or a lecturer. It's what you do will always try and present itself as the answer to that question. Who are you? But what's interesting is when you're in freelance, you feel this a little bit more acutely. Because in those other careers, what stands between you and the client is a company name or a brand name. But when you're in freelance, you are the brand. You see, I felt this especially in an industry where what I did is what they called me. I was a clapper loader. What that meant was I clapped the board, I would shout, scene 124, take 2, Bravo camera, tsh. I literally did that, so I was a clapper. And I loaded film into the camera, so I was a clapper loader. But what was interesting was that name also defined a very clear place that I fitted into a ladder on set. And it held so much more than just clapper loader. It also meant that I couldn't speak to certain people on set. It also meant that my opinion didn't really matter much. It also meant that when I went to lunch, there were certain tables I shouldn't sit at. Can you see how letting my work define and answer that question is incredibly dangerous? Because what it would say to me is, you're a clapper loader, you're only as good as your last job, you're forgettable, think Daniel Craig, you are not trusted enough to take or borrow money, and your name is where it is in the credits for a reason. See, allowing what you do to answer the question, who am I, will cause you to wake up in the morning with huge levels of anxiety as you try to prove and create an identity for yourself. Or what will happen is you will toss and turn at night because you're only, when the day's gone badly, because you're only as good as your last job. Or what will happen is when you receive criticism, you will respond to it with deep levels of emotion and fear because you are the brand. Now, some of you might say, Iain, you're just a little bit grumpy because you were at the bottom of a ladder. And I would say, no, not really. In camera, it's actually quite glamorous. Camera was a glamorous department to be in. We were considered the special forces of the film industry. First to arrive, last to leave, always efficient, great systems, and nothing could happen without us. But then I also found that as I started to climb this well-defined ladder in the film industry, allowing my work to answer that question became just as dangerous. You see, it's very different. It is different and it feels different, but there's immense danger on both sides of the ladder allowing that to answer the question, who am I? You see, pride or worthlessness, superiority or inferiority, success or failure all lurk to be the answer to that question, no matter what side of the ladder you are on. And there are so many voices that would try to answer this question for us. There are layers of voices, and allowing work to be that voice that answers that question is incredibly superficial. Think of Shrek. He said that great line, onions have layers. And so do the voices that we can allow to answer this question for us. There's a superficial layer, if you peel back the onion first, of your mom. She's biased, and that's another talk for another time. You could let people around you answer that question. You could let your work answer that question. You could go a little bit deep and you could let your friends answer that question. You could let the voices in your head answer that question, but that's very dangerous. Or you could let your fears and anxieties answer that question. You see, as you start drilling down into that, through the layers, past the superficial answers to that question, as you go deeper and deeper, you'll see that there are many voices that want to answer that question. But if we really are created creatures, then the voice that has the most weight in answering this question has to be the Creator. And if God is who He says He is, then it's not a trite response to allow Him to answer the question. In fact, I think when you drill down deep enough and you actually reach conviction on that reality, what happens is you realize we're asking the wrong question. The question can't be, who am I? But the question becomes, who does God say I am? And what's incredible is that at the very least, He says we are image bearers. And at the most glorious, He says that we are sons and daughters. You see, when you build your identity on that reality, you wake up in the morning with restedness in your heart. You wake up in the morning in an identity, not having to build an identity. You wake up in the morning in a place of peace, not having to tick things off a list to get peace. It changes your whole perspective. It made me realize that the crushing voices in the film industry are just a small part of who I am. Being a clapper loader is just a small part of who I am. It does not have the final answer to that question. You see, this perspective saved me from those crushing voices which would try to get me to reach a place where I define myself by valuable or worthless. The perspective protects me. You see, I'm really glad that I learned this before becoming a pastor 2 years ago, because I went from a conversation starter, film industry, to a conversation ender, pastor. Some people think that I am a delusional madman who speaks to my imaginary friend, and others think I'm running some sort of Ponzi money-making scheme. But can you see how superficial it is to let what we do define or be the answer to who are we? Because it can change so quickly. You are so much more than what you do. You are so much more than where your work would say that you fit into the credits. In fact, let's get rid of that question, who am I? And replace it with a more appropriate question, who does God say I am? And at the very least, we're an image bearer. At the most glorious, we are a son or daughter. And then when it comes to value, you were worth the death of His Son. Thank you very much.